Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. And today, inshallah, we're going to continue with the segment that we were in with Surah Shu'ara. And of course, we're in the segment where it's actually talking about Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam. Of course, we finished the part when it talks about Prophet Musa alayhi salam. Now we're talking about Prophet Ibrahim within the segment of Surah Shu'ara. And of course, we're focusing on the part where Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam actually makes the dua. So Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam is utilizing that moment of that spirituality, that connection between him and the Lord Almighty, and he starts making the dua after making the da'wah. So he's making da'wah, in other words, um, practicing that mission in speaking about Islam to the people that were surrounding him, and at the same time, he was making that moment. Utilizing that moment, let's say it that way, to actually deepen the connection between him and the Lord Almighty. So he would compare what they were worshiping. So he was having that conversation. Are these idols which they were worshiping? Of course, are these idols at the level to be a Lord, or even give the same power of the Lord Almighty? And in where are they really able to hear you? Are they really able to hold any type of a relationship between you and them? And are they able to give you any good? Are they able to give you any harm? In other words, those things are extremely subtle. Those things are extremely silent. Those things are extremely blocked from you and them, and these things absolutely cannot be the creator, because they do not even have the power to even give themselves the power to hear, the power to give you any harm, good, or any type of power to maintain even themselves. If these things do not have the power to give themselves, then how are they going to be the ones to have the power to give you life or even death? And of course, then Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam continues to teach them to teach them that spiritual connection between himself and the Lord Almighty. So he expresses it to them that as for Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, he relates to the one that created the purpose and created life before even his existence. الذي خلقني فهو يهدين. The one that created me is the one that's capable of giving me guidance. In other words, the purpose of life actually preceded life. And the one that sustains me with food and drinking throughout my existence, and the one that sustains even those situations when I would have a deformality, when I would have any type of illness, is the one that actually sustains me with health. وَالَّذِي يُمِيتُنِي ثُمَّ يُحْيِينِ. And then he's also the one that brings death to me and then life. And we talked about the part, why did it bring, and why did the ayat actually mention death before mentioning life? Even though we would think it would make sense to speak about life, then speak about death. But it is very frequent that in the Quran it actually speaks about death and speaks about life. Because even in Surah Al-Zumar, it actually mentions that رَبَّنَا أَمَتَّنَا اثْنَتَيْنِ وَأَحْيَيْتَنَا اثْنَتَيْنِ. You made us die twice and you made us alive twice. How is it that we had died twice and we had lived twice? Of course, this is speaking about by the time in Judgment Day. So how did we die twice? So the death that preceded our life, in other words, the non existence that we were in before our life now, is considered a form of death. And then when we die again, that's already the second death and not the first death. So the second death is really the death that we will be brought to in this life which comes to us. And أحييتنا اثنتين, because we are live now, and on Judgment Day we will be live again the second time at when we're resurrected. So that's why they would say ربنا أمتنا اثنتين وأحييتنا اثنتين فاعترفنا بذنوبنا, that they will admit and confess the sins and how they left the Lord Almighty, even though they had seen the power of their life and death, and that based on seeing the pattern in how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had already created them once, which is our creation right now, that He's capable of bringing them back to life even after they die, which is our death right now. وَالَّذِي أَطْمَعُ أَن يَغْفِرَ لِي خَطِيئَتِي يَوْمَ الدِّينِ. Now, we talked about how the chronology of this, in where the chronology is that the purpose preceded life, and then throughout our life we're looking at the power of the Lord Almighty to help us continue and sustain our life, and then continues with that part of it in where it's speaking about the chronology of our own existence, in where death comes in and then life again. So this وَالَّذِي يُمِيتُنِي is most likely speaking about the death that is coming to us after this existence that we're in. ثُمَّ يُحْيِينَ, and most likely this is talking about, since we're talking about the chronology here, this is talking about the resurrection after death. So this is not talking about our life now, but this is actually speaking about this resurrection after the death that will be coming to us. وَالَّذِي أَطْمَعُ أَن يَغْفِرَ لِي خَطِيئَتِي يَوْمَ الدِّينِ. And the word أطمع, it's like saying that I have hopes that He will be the one to forgive my sins. Again, with the chronology, so after our resurrection, we would have a moment where it is the moment that the Lord Almighty will hold us accountable for our sins and hold us accountable, and we'll have a conversation, just like in the hadith, the hadith that was narrated by Adi ibn Hatim al-Ta'i, where the Prophet ﷺ, that is, when he was having that personal conversation with Adi ibn Hatim al-Ta'i, and told him that, by the one that has my soul in his hand, you will stand in front and before your Lord Almighty without an interpreter between you and the Lord Almighty. You will stand face to face, one in front of one, with the Lord Almighty. You will stand with no interpreter between both of you. In other words, no medium between you and the Lord Almighty. رَبِّ هَبْ لِي حُكْمًا وَأَلْحِقْنِي بِالصَّالِحِينَ. So now he takes on to mention the legacy that he wants to be mentioned for. Rabbi habli hukman. So, O Lord Almighty, grant me. So the word hab is grant. So grant me, and we talked about the word hukman, in where he wanted to be a prophet. He wanted to be in a position where he would have a legacy that would carry the principle of Tawheed, the principle of closeness to the Lord Almighty, and also a principle that others would follow. وَأَلْحِقْنِي بِالصَّالِحِينَ, and that would be on Judgment Day. Follow me up. In other words, let me follow, let me continue, let me be joined بالصالحين. Now, بالصالحين can actually include, now the word صالحين is usually pious or saints, but the word salihin usually is at a lower level than the anbiya. The anbiya, or the prophets, and siddiqeen are the second level. So prophets are the highest level. All right. Well, angels are higher, but anbiya are the highest level. And then we have siddiqeen. Siddiqeen are like saints. And then we have a lower level, which is a salihin. And then mu'mineen, and then muslimin, and so forth. All right. So those are the different levels. But here, the word al-hiqni bis-salihin, Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam didn't want to be at the lowest level, of course, but he was actually including. So the word salihin can be a comprehensive word to include the prophets, can include the messengers, can include the saints, the siddiqeen, and can include the salihin. So the word bis salihin is not speaking about the specific group, a specific group which is a specific level. They're the salihin, which is definitely a lower group than the anbiya, but this is actually being more inclusive to mean those that are in the highest level of righteousness, those that include the anbiya, the prophets, the siddiqeen, and so forth. So وَأَلْحِقْنِي بِالصَّالِحِينَ, in where he wanted to be part of the salihin. And this is actually really important to remember, because the dua for before sleeping, that the person would say, Allahumma bismika wada'tu janbi, O Lord Almighty, by your name I'll rest my side. وَبِكَ أَرْفَعُ, and by your name I would raise my side. Allahumma amsakta nafsi farhamha, O Lord Almighty, if you would keep or preserve my soul, then be merciful on it. وإن أرسلتها فاحفظها بما تحفظ به عبادك الصالحين. And وإن أرسلتها, in other words, if it was decreed by the Lord Almighty that death would come to us during our sleep, that you would make that dua, Ya Allah, if you had decreed that my soul would be taken away and would be sent away for death, decreed death on it, then combine it with what you combine the souls of the saints and the souls of the pious ones. In other words, there is an area that keeps the spirit or the spirits of the pious and the saints, etc. And there's an area that also preserves the souls of those that are on the other side of being salihin. So here, alhiqni bis salihin, where Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam is also making this dua that he wanted a legacy, wanted a legacy to be mentioned after him, which is why you could see here وَجَعَلْ لِي لِسَانَ صِدْقٍ فِي الْآخِرِينَ, in where not only on Judgment Day, but even in this dunya, he actually said وَجَعَلْ لِي لِسَانَ صِدْقٍ فِي الْآخِرِينَ, that he wanted a legacy where his name would be mentioned whenever righteousness, whenever good, whenever piety, whenever high principle is mentioned, Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam wanted his name to be the one as the one to mark, the one to be the one in the highest position, that all those that are righteous would remember his name as the best and the highest role model to demonstrate how and what it means to be pious, and what it means to be spiritual, and what it means to be submissive to the Lord Almighty. And which is why, of course, when we see Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, whether the Christians, the Jews, and the Muslims, of course, remember and commemorate Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam as the one that all these religions would agree on, except, or if you go to other prophets, the other prophets don't hold the same type of commemoration that Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam holds. So Christians, Jews, and even Muslims would all agree that Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam will always remain the name that is لسان صدق في الآخرين. Yet Jews will not remember or will not commemorate Prophet Isa alayhi salam, and nor would they commemorate Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And of course, we're looking at that. Doesn't mean that they hold less value, but this is just to realize how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had actually answered the dua for Prophet Ibrahim. وَجَعَلْنِي مِنْ وَرَثَةِ جَنَّةِ النَّعِيمِ. Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam is also making another dua, waj'alni, again that chronology, waj'alni, and make me from those that will, the word warathati jannatin na'im, the ones that would inherit jannatin na'im, the Jannah. Now the word Jannah, anything that has the letter Jim and Noon, simply means something hidden. So Jannah here, we're looking at jinn, hidden, creatures. We're looking at Jannah, which is a hidden garden. We're looking at Janine, which is a hidden embryo or a fetus. And we're looking at Warathati Jannatin Na'im. Make me amongst those that would inherit those gardens, the hidden gardens that are for pleasure, that were designed for pleasure. So an-na'im actually refers to everything in this garden was actually created for pleasure. Jannatin Na'im. Everything in it, where it contains absolute pleasure, it contains absolute happiness. So when somebody would argue, well, if there is a God, then why in this life can God actually eliminate evil or pain in this life? Well, that's the thing, is that the Lord Almighty did not make this life absolute happiness, and did not make this life something or a place that will contain absolute happiness or absolute good. And which is why the Lord Almighty had given man free will. Why was man given free will? Well, that's in order to be tested. In order to be tested, the test is supposed to give you free will, and therefore if free will was not there, then the meaning of a test would not actually be possible. Now, the other part is when we're looking at free will, that's why you see absolute evil. You would see absolute evil because man can decide, and because of through their free will, they can decide to do wronghood and absolute wronghood, or they can decide to do absolute good or absolute piety. Now, having that being said, if the person in this life, and by the way, speaking of, before I even jump to the second issue, when we look at absolute when we look at this life, and when we speak about absolute good or absolute happiness, this life, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created within it هَدَيْنَاهُ النَّجْدَيْنِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had guided man to both good and evil. Now, in this life, in order to be the Khalifa, and what we mean by the Khalifa is not the person that's leading, but the person that would create, the person that would create civilizations, the person that would rule, the person that is capable of bringing in some kind of power, whether it's to bring modernity or whether it's to rule in both ends. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave man the capacity to use intellect to build or not, or even ruin and destruct. And which is why when we look at this life, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, part of the test that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tested us in is how we are capable of using our intellect to bring about civilization, to bring about principle, and build this world in principle, or even build this world in gangstry even. And of course, it's not to be judged based on the suit that people wear. So when we look at those two elements, we could see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tested us in our capacities of how we're capable of making the principle of the Lord Almighty be the principle that we rule by on a personal level, and of course on a community level. We're going to get to that, because when we speak of Qawm Ad, this point that I'm mentioning right now is a pivotal point that we're going to get back to. So, وَاغْفِرْ لِأَبِي إِنَّهُ كَانَ مِنَ الضَّالِّينَ. So what does Prophet Ibrahim continue? Well, he didn't want just a legacy in the community, but he also wanted something that was dear to him. What was it? His own father. He said, and forgive my father. He had been he had been amongst those that were deluded. Now, that was during the life of his father. But after Prophet Ibrahim In another ayah, it explains that after Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam realizes that his father had insisted and determined to be on the wrong path, he stopped making the dua to seek forgiveness for his father, because his father had already chosen to be amongst those that would associate partners with the Lord Almighty, or to be in more detail, he had decided to turn away from all the different principles, and the highest of the principles is to worship the Lord Almighty Himself. Then comes all the different details of the principles on how you actually define principle itself. وَلَا تُخْزِنِي يَوْمَ يُبْعَثُونَ, and don't humiliate me on the day when everyone is resurrected. يَوْمَ لَا يَنْفَعُ مَالٌ وَلَا بَنُونَ. Now, what does humility and humiliation here, what is he referring to? Well, that's because people on that day, just like in our time, we would think, and we would usually judge honor based on wealth, children, and what different things we own. In other words, possessions. We would usually judge honor based on that. So Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam did not only want to do the da'wah for others, and this is really important, that oftentimes it is very common that when we engage in da'wah, it would be like we're talking to others, and we would sometimes forget that the da'wah or the words that we're saying, that we need to hear our words. We need to hear our words. Take a moment to listen and not only let your words speak to others, but let your words speak to yourself. Listen to what you're saying, and that's the same thing that Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam was doing. He was actually speaking to his people, and he was listening to the words in order to bring that maw'idha for himself, in order to remind himself. So he says it in a way where he's talking and making the dua, he's talking to the Lord Almighty, but during that conversation, he's actually doing that dua in where he is also speaking to the people to hear him as he would speak to his Lord Almighty. So he would say, وَلَا تُخْزِنِي يَوْمَ يُبْعَثُونَ, don't humiliate me on the day where everyone will be resurrected, on the day that no money, no wealth, and no children will benefit any individual. Why and what was he trying to say? He was trying to tell the people that had rejected the da'wah, he was wanting to tell them that what you regard as honor, when you would think that honor is based on wealth and is based on children and what people would regard as the resource and the reference for honor, he's telling them that's not what honor is really based on. And even your ancestry, your name, who you are, that's not what defines your honor. Then he wanted to lay out the statement, what really defines honor. He says, إِلَّا مَنْ أَتَى اللَّهَ بِقَلْبٍ سَلِيمٍ. Wealth, money, children, all those different things will not give you honor. The only thing, an exception to what will give you honor, is really the one who comes to the Lord Almighty with a pure heart. In other words, with a pure heart, that what is pure heart? A pure heart, a heart that had come sincere for the Lord Almighty, that's number one. The other part is that this heart, not only is it pure from associating partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but it is also pure from doing different things for other than the Lord Almighty. and biqalbin salim is also telling us that when you live on the principle and based on the principle of the Lord Almighty, that is what is going to bring you purity slash stability in your heart. When we're speaking about stability in the heart, that's what brings you stability in your action. That's what will bring you righteousness in your action. It actually starts from within. There's no way that man can live in a contradiction between what actions he does and between what is in his heart. If your heart is so focused on wealth and business, your actions are going to speak that you're just concerned about your job and your money. If your heart is focused on thinking about a man or a woman, your body and your behavior is going to be constantly, and your mind is going to be constantly busy thinking about that person. If your heart and your mind is constantly thinking about what honor and what legacy in terms of dunya, in terms of this life you would carry, whether it's, I don't know, winning the Olympics, or whether it's getting a Nobel Prize, or whether it's getting some position in this life, in probably getting a degree in school, or etc. If that is what you consider as the most important thing, then your focus is going to be focused on grades. Is it always bad to focus on grades? The answer is absolutely not. But there's a difference between having that as a tool for success and between having it as a goal for success. An ultimate goal is different than a tool, because a tool is supposed to help you succeed in this life, and definitely success in this life does bring success in the akhirah many times. Having a good marriage is part of what Islam wants you to have, because stability in your world definitely helps you get stability in your focus, in your connection with the Lord Almighty. And that's why asking for rizq, asking for wealth, for halal wealth, is part of the dua that we would actually make. Asking for Rabbi habli, Rabbi, what was the dua that Prophet Yahya had actually made? Prophet Yahya, the dua that he made, Allahumma la tadharni fardan wa anta khairul warithin. He made the dua to get children. Why? Because he felt that that would bring him closer to the Lord Almighty. He felt that peace of him that is part of his own human nature, would actually bring him stability and peace on the inside. A pious husband, pious children, wealth, a home to live in. And that's why we would also make the dua, Allahumma atina fi dunya hasanatan wa fil akhirati hasana. We would make the dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would grant us good in this dunya and grant us good in the akhirah. Because granting good and asking to get granted good in the dunya, which is the life that you live in now, is actually a pavement to grant you more focus in the akhirah. There's absolutely nothing wrong with making dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would grant you good in this dunya. Absolutely nothing wrong in making dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would give you a good home, good rizq, good health, good wealth, etc. Because that can also pave good in bringing stability and focus even in spirituality. So here, when we say إِلَّا مَنْ أَتَى اللَّهَ بِقَلْبٍ سَلِيمٍ, that except those, in other words, none of all the different things that people would think are going to bring them honor is necessarily going to be interceding for them, except one thing, which is the one that comes with a pure heart that is focused on the Lord Almighty, and a pure heart that is living based on the principles that the Lord Almighty had set. Why the Lord Almighty had set? Because the heart that lives on the principle that it wants to lay out is actually not the heart that's laying out the principle for them. But in fact, it's actually their own inclinations. It's basically their own body that's laying out the different principles for them, and they would think it's their heart. It's the different desires that the body might have in hormones or different things that the body wants to live in this life, which is the animal side of us. So the Lord Almighty here is also mentioning in the ayah that what you need to focus on is not feeding your body, but is actually feeding your heart. As human beings, there's an animal side within us. The animal side in where we focus on eating, drinking, and what we usually consider as the struggling for survival. The struggle for survival as human beings is actually that animal side of us that we cannot neglect, which is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had permitted that we would engage in eating, drinking, and reproduction, but on a stable level, which is what is categorized as halal, in order for us not to get carried away with just wanting to feed the animal side of us. In other words, to feed the animal side of us to help us sustain life is needed, but on a very minimal side, so that it will not take us and will not get stronger in its control over us. Because the second that you focus on feeding your desires, those desires will get stronger in you. And then you will start confusing on whether those desires are necessarily your heart's desires, or whether it's intellect desires, or whether it's your bodily desires. When you feed your desires, they will start gaining control over your behavior, and without you realizing, they will control you and you will become that particular behavior. In other words, that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Inhum kal an'ami bal hum adallu sabila," that they are just like animals, just like kal an'am, the word an'am, like cattle, in where their life is just to eat, drink, and reproduce. Bal hum adal. In fact, they are even more deviant. Why? Because they have the intellect which cattle don't have. But unfortunately, if that intellect is not used in order to be utilized to bring good in this life, and to bring them to a realization how living up to the purpose of life and the principle, that's when they will be deviant and even lower than the cattle, because they did not use their mind and their spirituality to gain honor and to gain stability in their life. وَأُزْلِفَتِ الْجَنَّةُ لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. Now, if you look at the letter what right there, after it had laid out إِلَّا مَنْ أَتَى اللَّهَ بِقَلْبٍ سَلِيمٍ, except the ones that come with a pure heart, then it laid out that wa, and there was a time lapse. The time lapse, this wa, is hiding a lot of different details which this ayah does not mention. The details of what's going to happen to the people in the grave, what's going to happen after we die. The details here are not mentioned. It right away jumped to a very visual moment and said, وَأُزْلِفَتْ. The word uzlifat means that Jannah had then been brought closer for those that had religious integrity. When we say the word muttaqeen, which I would actually mean the ones that were living based on religious integrity, but the religious integrity that they were carrying was constant, and that's why it didn't say that they had taqwa only, but it actually said muttaqeen. In other words, they lived based on this religious integrity all the time. They were determined to live based on this religious integrity throughout their life, that it became who they are. And this is really important, because do you always necessarily live based on taqwa? It can happen that you can have your shortcomings. It can happen that a day or two or something just happens and you just lose on your deen at one point. It can happen. Which is why the Prophet ﷺ actually says, لا يزني الزاني وهو مؤمن. When the person commits zina, he does not commit zina while he's in the state of Iman. What happened at that moment? He lost his position of being that believer. It doesn't mean he was kafir. Not at all. Not because a person committed a sin, it doesn't get them out of the fold of Islam. But at that moment, they had lost the level of Iman that was strong at one point, and then they went lower in their religious integrity. In other words, it can happen that a sister is a believer or a sister is a mu'mina, not a Muslima, but a mu'mina. And the level of mu'min is higher than the level of Muslim. Because the level of Muslim, the person is acting in their behavior most of the times based on Islam. Doing their 5 daily prayers, Ramadan, fasting Ramadan, they're doing their zakat, etc. But the level of Iman is a different level. The level of Iman, they're doing, they went farther than the basics of Islam, than the pillars of Islam. They went farther than that. But even when they went farther, can there be a drop in that person's Iman at different times? Absolutely. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ actually said, Al-Imanu yazidu wa yanqus, yazidu bil-ta'at wa yanqusu bil-ma'asiyah. Faith or Iman increases and decreases. It increases with good deeds and decreases with sin. When we look at increases with good deeds, in other words, the more commitment you have on practicing the principle of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the higher your level of Iman gets. Why? Because the more focus you bring into your religious integrity, your spirituality, your focus on the Lord Almighty. This focus gets stronger to the point that it actually becomes very strong to the point that you're capable of seeing the unseen. What was that? The unseen? So what will I start seeing? Malaika? No. You won't see malaika walking around you, because the hadith doesn't necessarily say that you will see malaika walking around you. That's why that hadith actually says أن تؤمن بالله وملائكته وكتبه ورسله واليوم الآخر. It actually talked a different type of seeing. It's more of a heart vision. The heart vision, which is right here, إلا من أتى الله بقلب سليم, which is what is mentioned in the hadith that was mentioned as commonly known as Hadith Jibreel. When Jibreel alayhi salam comes to the Prophet sallam in a form of a human being and asked him, what is Islam? And he answered the 5 daily, the 5 pillars. And then when he asked him, what is the Iman? Then he told him it's when you have faith in the Lord Almighty, the angels, the books, and the day of judgment, etc. And when we look at the level of Iman, it is more speaking about a different type of a vision. It's more of a heart vision than anything else. And that's why when you look at this ayah, the muttaqeen, the ones that have lived in religious integrity, in constant determination to live based on the principles of the Lord Almighty, that's when, because they had lived that vision to see based on the vision that the Lord Almighty had set, that people would see righteousness and wronghood. What does that mean? The Prophet ﷺ actually said in the hadith that none of you would be believers حتى يكون هواه تبعا لما جئت به. You would not be believers until your hawa, until your desires actually follow what the Prophet ﷺ had come with. In other words, what? You would not only practice, let's say, Islam or Salah because you're obligated to do it, but until you start enjoying doing what the Prophet ﷺ had actually come with and what the Prophet had come with. And haram would be so detestable. You would hate to do haram, not because only it's haram, but you would not even have taste for it. You wouldn't even have a taste for haram. Halal and obligation, you would have that practice that has been so, you were so committed to that practice that it becomes who you are. It becomes what you are. It becomes what you embody. You embody that principle. And that's why when you look at the word muttaqeen, these people embodied the principles of the Lord Almighty, and they had that high religious integrity that they actually embodied principle, and the principle that was determined and assigned by the Lord Almighty. And that's why it said, وَأُزْلِفَتِ الْجَنَّةُ الْمُتَّقِينَ. Why? They believed in Jannah, but now, uzlifat, now they are seeing it with their own naked eye. Uzlifat. It wasn't something that was far. It is now something so close to them that they could see it with their own bare naked eyes. And it's come so close to them because they had lived to see the world through the lens that the Lord Almighty had set for people to see righteousness and wronghood based on. They had such high religious vision, let's say it that way, that they actually saw the truth as truth and the evil as evil and the wronghood as wronghood. They had a different type of a lens. وَبُرِّزَتِ الْجَحِيمُ لِلْغَاوِينَ. Why burrizat? But here, uzlifat. The word burrizat is actually meaning that it was brought to clear vision. Burrizat. They didn't see it before, but now, burrizat. Even when they were resurrected, when they went on Judgment Day, they still had some denial. They still lived in some hope. But then burrizat, then it was brought so clear to them that lilghawin, it was al-jahim, it was hellfire. It was brought so clear right before their eyes so they could see it, because they were still living in that denial. Who? Lilghawin. Now I want you to look at the word ghawin, compare it to al-muttaqin. Al-muttaqin, we talked about it. Al-ghawin. What is al-ghawin? Al-ghawin is a person that practices ghay. What is ghay? So ghay is basically a delusion where the person would go off track, which is when you look at the ayah in Surah Al-Kahf, when it actually tells us that, and don't follow those that would وَاتَّبَعَ هُوَ كَانَ أَمْرُهُ فُرُطًا. Don't follow those that would follow their inclinations. وَكَانَ أَمْرُهُ فُرُطًا. And their matters are not going to be set in their boundaries. They will keep going off track, and there will be a track that is endless in how far in the delusion and in their lack of integrity. There's not going to be an end to it. It will continue and continue. And of course, when you go down there's no end to how far down you will go, how far low you will go. It will never end. You will go low and low and low. There's no qa. There's no end to how far low that person will go. And that's why the ayah said, Lil Ghaween, hellfire would now come to be presented, would be put forward. It would be put up. It will be put up. It will be brought close. It will be brought so clearly, so where they could visualize it to actually see it. Lil Ghaween, for those that lived based on delusion after delusion after delusion. They had no point. They had no point of stop. They had no boundary to how far low they would go. And that's why they would become al-ghaween. They would become these transgressors, that they didn't stop at one point at what transgression they would stop at. It was transgression after transgression after transgression. And in other words, they were crossing every single limit. There was no limit that they would stop at. وَقِيلَ لَهُمْ أَيْنَمَا كُنْتُمْ تَعْبُدُونَ. Now, they had come to the place. Now, it's where. قِيلَ لَهُمْ أَيْنَمَا كُنْتُمْ تَعْبُدُونَ. Now they're being told, where are the different things that you were worshipping? In other words, the different things that you had considered as a goal in life. A goal in life, what they used to worship was really other than the Lord Almighty. Where is it that what you used to worship? Min dunillah, other than the Lord Almighty. In other words, they used to worship other than the Lord Almighty. هل ينصرونكم أو ينتصرون. Are these things giving you victory, or are they even giving victory to their own selves? فَكُبْكِبُوا فِيهَا هُمْ وَالْغَاوُونَ. The word فَكُبْكِبُوا, the word, every single word in Lugha Arabiya where the letters are actually repeated, كُبْكِبُوا, صح, whatever it is, whenever you see two letters coming in, this actually reflects a number of different things. Number one, a repetition. Number two, in where it can also reflect a force that is put within it. So here, فَكُبْكِبُوا, the word kaba or kabba would mean to spill. So here, فَكُبْكِبُوا means that they were spilled in it. Now they had become an object. And the ones to put force on them were actually the malaika. Now these people were totally helpless. These people became as if there was no force whatsoever from them, no momentum that they carried, but all the momentum was laid on them. And that's why فَكُبْكِبُوا, they were absolutely helpless. So they had become an object in where the malaika would be the ones to literally spill them, throw them. There was a momentum that the malaika would put in force that the malaika would put on them, and they would be spilled fiha. What is fiha? Fiha is talking about al-jahim. This is the pronoun fiha is coming to the nearest mentioned noun. The nearest mentioned noun is basically al-jahim. So here, then they were spilled or thrown inside hellfire. Them wal-ghawun. They were spilled, and those al-ghawun. Al-ghawin and al-ghawun. What's the difference? Well, this is actually the same word, but this is actually just a different part of speech. So they were thrown, and wal-ghawun, and those that had actually led them in that transgression. Both were now in the same place. In other words, whether the person is leading in transgression or whether the person is a follower, they're both going to be in the same ending. In other words, it doesn't help to say this is the leader of that gain or transgression, because at the end of the day, whether you decided to follow or whether you decided to lead in transgression, the ending is going to be the same. وَجُنُودُ إِبْلِيسَ أَجْمَعُونَ. Well, not only are the people that led in transgression, but even those hidden forces, which are the forces of Iblis that you cannot see, the forces of the jinn that you cannot see, that are whispering in your ears and trying to push you towards transgression, all are now in the same place. قالوا وهم فيها يختصمون. Now, they're all inside hellfire, but there's somewhat, in the beginning they would have hope. Maybe we can prove, and maybe we can eliminate our of course our guilt, or we can eliminate that we carry the same amount of guilt. So they would go into an argument. They would say, while they're yahtasimun, they would, even though they were together at the same level, in some form of unity, but now they're actually in an argument with one another. Each one is trying to uplift the guilt and trying to put the guilt on the other person. This one is saying, you led in this, you should get a higher level or a higher amount of punishment. I was just a follower. And the leader will say, well, the ones to get the higher level of punishment are the ones that were the behind forces, which are the jinn. But they would say, they're going into this discussion, Tallahi in kunna lafi dalalin mubin. After they had went into that argument and they had discovered that there's no way that they will be saved and that they're all in it, and no matter how and who they wanted to lay the responsibility on, in the end, your responsibility is really yourself. What did they say after even going to that discussion? They just said, Tallahi in kunna lafi dalalin mubin. Then they say, Tallahi. Now the word Tallahi is a little different from Billahi, because the word Tallahi carries remorse within it. When you look at the word Wallahi, it is actually using the word wa in, yes, it's an oath, but the word Tallahi, it's an oath that carries within it a form of remorse. But Wallahi is carrying within it an oath with a form, or in a form of some type of carrying honesty, in where the person is claiming honesty. The person is here putting in some form of considering the power of the Lord Almighty to witness on them that they're actually honest, but here that they're carrying that remorse. In kunna lafi dalalin mubin. We were in clear, in kunna lafi. This is actually telling us that they had come to a realization that they cannot whatsoever deny, that they were lafi, incomplete. The word lafi, incomplete delusion. That is very clear. Incomplete, clear, ultimate delusion. But now it won't help. At one point they were swearing by all their power that what the messengers had come with was nothing but delusion. Now, after seeing hellfire, after being put in it, after being put in that realization that all those different things were not really going to help them, that's when they will come to that realization we were incomplete in an ultimate delusion. إذ نسويكم برب العالمين. Now, scholars here had differences of opinions when, of course, what were they having that remorse over? Well, they were having the remorse over the first thing. إذ نسويكم برب العالمين. The remorse that they had actually put it equal those that they had worshipped or those that had supported them, whether the leaders in leading them to transgression or whether the hidden leaders, the jinn and iblis, that whether they had put them on the same level of the Lord Almighty. In other words, they did actually recognize the Lord Almighty, but they actually admitted that by taking their principle or by worshiping other than the Lord Almighty, that they had actually lived a life where they had regarded those things at the same level of God. When we look at إِذْ نُسَوِّيكُمْ بِرَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ, they had come to a realization, whether it's delusion in worship or whether it's another form of worship, which is delusion in action. What does that mean? Worship is not just in ritual. Worship is also in the behavior you recognize and you live based on in life that you would consider as a reference, whether it's a human being or whether it's your own self. If you consider that as your reference to live your life based on, in Islam, that's a form of worship that you're living in. So worship is not just in ritual, but it's also what you carry out in life. What you carry out in life in itself is a form of worship. Whether it's a morsel of food that you put in your husband or your husband's mouth, or whether it's in whether you decide to walk on the street in a particular way, that's a form of worship. Why? Because your life is not only in what you do in a place of worship. Your life is actually your time. Your time is actually what considers and reflects the purpose that your own life was created for. Your own life and every single thing you do in this life is actually going to be something that you will be held accountable for. وَمَا أَضَلَّنَا إِلَّا الْمُجْرِمُونَ. Now, they wanted to again try to find someone else to be held accountable instead of them. They said, وَمَا أَضَلَّنَا, and the only ones that had deluded us are the ones that are mujrimun, the ones that are transgressors, the ones that had decided to leave the path of the Lord Almighty. فَمَا لَنَا مِن شَافِعِينَ. Now, we don't have any intercessors and anyone to intercede for us. Not even a close friend. What's a close friend have to do with this? At a moment when you lose hope, you would start looking for anyone to intercede for you, to stand up, to come and somehow from a higher level to actually come and say, well, I'll be there to support you. But now they realized that the friends that they were with, and of course, who you hang out with, is really who you are. And that's why you have to look at who is your friend. If your friend does not increase your faith, don't take that person as a friend. Find another friend. Because at the end, If that friend is not capable of being the friend to lead you to Jannah, you don't want that person, because then that would actually mean they're people that are leading you to hellfire. If that friend is not a friend to increase your faith, to increase your closeness to the Lord Almighty, then that friend is certainly taking you back. They're either going to be a momentum to put you up, to elevate your level in your spirituality, or you befriending them, they're going to start becoming the gravity to push you down and lower your level in this dunya. You have to review yourself. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually says in Surah Al-Furqan, الأخلاء بعضهم يومئذ بعضهم لبعض عدو إلا المتقين. The best friends on Judgment Day will be the worst enemies to themselves with each other. إلا المتقين, except those that live based on religious integrity. What happens? Most best friends will be enemies to one another. And here, فَلَوْ أَنَّ لَنَا كَرَّةً فَنَكُونَ مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. Then they would say, if only we had a karra, another chance, and we would be part of the believers. إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَةً. In that, there's a sign. In other words, there's something to look into, so that you will not be a pattern of such. وَمَا كَانَ أَكْثَرُهُمْ مُؤْمِنِينَ. And most people are not going to be part of the believers. In other words, don't look at what the majority is doing. And certainly, don't let the majority of what people are practicing be the paradigm and the standard you base your principles on. The majority is actually not doing the right thing. Don't look at what the majority is saying. Don't look at what the majority is practicing. Don't look at what the majority is telling you about what you are and how you are. But وَإِنَّ رَبَّكَ لَهُوَ الْعَزِيزُ الرَّحِيمُ. Your Lord Almighty is actually self-sufficient. And your Lord Almighty is not in need for the masses. Your Lord Almighty is not in need for all the people. And He's most merciful. In other words, keep in mind that your Lord Almighty is not in need for all those people. You are in need for the Lord Almighty's mercy. All right. This is the segment about Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam. Then next week we'll be talking about Prophet Nuh from Surah Shu'ara, and hopefully we'll also get to Prophet Hud alayhi salam. And I'll be happy to hear if anybody has any questions, or if they would like to unmute themselves or even comment. Maybe I made a mistake in something, so go ahead. Even the people on Facebook, you could also write a question or comment as well. So go ahead. If anybody would like to unmute themselves, go ahead. I could see here it says Hassan C. Go ahead if you would like to say anything. I'm sorry you had your hand risen all the time and I didn't allow you, or didn't even call out your name. So go ahead, whoever would like to unmute themselves. Even if you don't know how to raise your hand, that's okay. Just unmute yourself and I'll be happy to hear you. I guess everyone, nobody wants to comment on anything. Sister Zaina, Yutundi, Sister Saima, Pilwasha. Oh, I think I met Sister Pilwasha in that retreat. And Noura, Fatima, Crystal, and Hassan. All right, so I think everybody is... Oh, there we go. Sister Fatima, go ahead. Sister Fatima, you unmuted yourself. Go ahead, sweetie.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam. How are you doing?
Good, alhamdulillah. About the friendship part, I'll just have a quick I don't know if it's a question or comment. You know, you have sometimes some people who are kind of struggling with their lives. Um, you kind of ended up being friends or kind of around each other, and they kind of you find like they don't have too much bad in them. They just a little bit of help. It's like Islam is there, but it's not really there. Do you feel like this kind of people shouldn't be as well part of the circle of friendship you're talking about?
I love what that actually takes me back to, look at, if you look at the friends that surround you, they're exactly like the meals that you would want around you. There are certain meals that you always need because they act as the main nutrition that your body needs. And there are certain friends that you would want for entertainment. At times, you would have those friends, and that acts as the junk food. And that's the same thing. How you deal with your friends is exactly the way you would deal with the food that you put on the table. The least you would want are those that are entertaining friends. The entertaining friends, if you take too much of it, you will get sick. You want friends that carry within them nutrition. It's just exactly like food. Most nutritious food does not carry a lot of sugar within it. The more sugar within that food, the more unhealthy, if you would want to say, that it gets. You want more nutrition, and that's the same thing. You want friends that carry within them the ilm, the akhlaq, the iman, and the nasiha. The friends that are willing to support you in giving you advice when you go wrong. That's the friend that you want. That's exactly like the nutrition that you want. That when you get ill, they'll be there to support you with the nutrition that you need in order to give you healing and remedy. It's exactly like friends. Yes, you also need some sugar, and those are usually the friends that act as the entertaining friends that keep you many times alive, energetic, and continue to bring you those moments of joy. And that's the same thing with food. You cannot live on cookies and crackers and that type of meal because your body is going to fail on you. And that's the same thing. If your friends are all about entertainment, change your friends because it's exactly like the meal. If your meals are all about if your meals are all about junk food and entertaining foods and foods that contain lots of sugar, then without you realizing, sooner or later you're going to start getting sick. Even if you feel the energy right now, that energy is going to be very temporary, but soon you're going to feel that sugar started wearing out and that energy started wearing out, and you're going to start getting sick sooner or later. That's the same thing. Choosing the friends that elevate your deen, that elevate your knowledge, that elevate and give you strong faith slash body slash spirit slash mind, all those different things are extremely important to find in a friend. You may not find them in one friend. You can have multiple friends. A friend that might have an attitude, but they're really smart and wise. Another friend, they might actually be strong, and sometimes it's hard to go and be at their pace, but they're still reminding me that I should be going faster. And that's the same thing. You need to choose multiple friends, and those friends, you also have to be careful about how you even deal with these friends because not always is that friend necessarily the person that you always enjoy being around. It's just like food. It's not always fun eating, the wheat, or I don't know, brown rice and cracked wheat and all these different healthy foods. It's not always fun, but we just have to accept that our body needs the nutrition just like our mind, our body, our our faith also needs that nutrition that feeds the soul, the mind, and the body. I hope I answered that one. Sister Noura, go ahead, Sister Noura.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
So I'm just wondering, like, what if you don't have like so many Muslims friends? Is it better to avoid having like non-Muslim close friends?
Well, here's here's the thing. The Prophet ﷺ actually said in one of the wills, لا يأكل طعامك إلا مؤمن. Make sure that you only eat with a believer. So what does that mean?
Mm-hmm.
If if I had, for example, a grandmother, or I happen to work in a non-Muslim in a non-Muslim university, does that mean I should not be with a non-Muslim and eating with them? No, but this is actually talking about that lifestyle that you live with. Make sure most of your company is part of the mu'mineen, because without you realizing, you will absorb. Should we live in a ghetto? Should we live somewhat in distance with those that are not mu'mineen? The answer generally is yes. You don't want to accompany those that are distant away from the deen too many times, because without you realizing, as a human being, your subconscious mind starts absorbing the different behaviors that you surround yourself with. So you want to eliminate, whether it's non-Muslim, or or whether it's deviant, or whether it's not practicing Muslim, etc. You want to eliminate as much as you can that exposure to wrong behavior, and that exposure to those that are deviant from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You want to eliminate as much as you can, because without you realizing, you will, no matter who you are, your exposure to that environment will start affecting you, and it will start rubbing off on you, and your mind will start seeing it as a normalized thing. You will normalize it. It will become something that's okay, that's normal. I've seen that too many times, without you realizing, your heart will start accepting it, and will start accepting such behaviors. So you want to, as much as you can, yes, it's important to do da'wah. Yes, it's important to reach out, but be careful in reaching out, trying to pull others away from hellfire, and you falling in it yourself. So you want to make sure that you don't expose yourself too much, and then end up falling in hellfire yourself under the pretense of I'm trying to do da'wah. I hope I answered that one.
Yeah, shukran.
Afwan. All right, so we'll see you all next week, unless somebody else wanted to unmute themselves. That's absolutely fine. Zaina, go ahead, Zaina.
Yes, I have a question. I have a best friend. She's non-Muslim,
Mm-hmm.
and we travel together. But I never really talked to her about religion, and she never talked to me about religion. But we've been best friends since we were little girls. Um, so is that not promiscuous, like to hang out and travel and do things with a friend who's non-Muslim?
No, no, I didn't say it's not
Oh,
permissible. I didn't say it's not
okay.
permissible to have
Okay. Mm-hmm.
an acquaintance. Let me use the word acquaintance, because a best friend is supposed to
Mm-hmm.
be a person that gives you nasiha, the person that's supposed to give
Mm-hmm.
you advice. And
Yeah.
advice in here, like I said, in Islam, a person that is considered a best friend is a person that feeds your soul, mind,
Mm-hmm.
and body. All right. So if a person is on a different vision in
Mm-hmm.
life about what feeds a soul, and what feeds a
Mm-hmm.
mind, what is halal, what is haram, etc., and what feeds a
Yeah.
body, is this person is this person really a best friend, or is this an acquaintance? You know
Okay.
what I mean? So we
Yeah.
have to review how we define the circumstances and the environment that we put ourselves in and who we
Okay.
put around us to feed those things for us. You understand what I'm saying? I'm not
Okay.
saying, I mean, I'm not saying, don't be friends with somebody like that. I'm just saying take a moment to review, is this person feeding what
Nice.
a person that I should be taking as a best friend supposed to be feeding?
Okay. Got it.
You
Thank
understand what I'm
you.
saying? All right, so Jazakumullah khairan, everyone. We'll see you all next week. Yes,
جزاكم الله
inshallah.
خيرا.
Wa iyyakum. All right, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.